Good evening and welcome to another preview live YouTube show from the Magpie Circle. We're joined by two guests tonight, one of whom is here, the other will be joining us shortly. Welcome, Leigh Curtis. Good to have you back from your loan spell with Nottingham Forest.
Yeah, it's good. It's good to be back. Obviously, kept abreast of what was going on at Meadow Lane at the weekend. Obviously, didn't see the game, but by all accounts, Notts should have perhaps won it in the last 5 minutes. So, on to Solihull Moors on Wednesday.
Yeah, I did feel for you a bit because you're missing Notts, and then it's one thing to go and watch Nottingham Forest or work professionally with Nottingham Forest at the City Ground. It's another one to go. I was going to say the Vetch Field for a minute, but is it Liberty Stadium now? All I know is it was a long time since because I missed the cup tie 2 years ago. I was away. It's a long haul there and back in the day.
Yeah, there and back in the day. It's actually a lot further than what I remembered from the last time round when obviously we went there for Notts in the FA Cup. But I mean, that was my last visit there. So that was 8-1 and then Saturday was 5-1. So the aggregate score is 13-2.
Swansea must love you coming. Can you get a job there at the Swansea Evening Echo?
Honestly,
or Swansea Evening Post, it's called, isn't it?
It was a long journey back, I can assure you.
Kate Oliver Ramsden's given us the thumbs up. Connor McManus says Leigh looks post-apocalyptic.
Lockdown. Well, I can't. Do you know? I've lost count of the amount of lockdowns we've had. So is this the third one? I think it's the third proper one. Is it? So it's not been too kind. They're getting worse. In fact, in terms of where my hair and facial hair is going. Yeah.
And our second guest, Simon Stone, we're glad to have back. I'm claiming the first world exclusive for the Magpie Circle podcast, thanks to Simon 2 weeks ago, when he actually came out and said it's the government are considering making it loans, not grants. And no one had heard a dicky bird about that at the time. And I remember when he said it, I thought, hey, have you got that right? And of course, in the next 2 or 3 days, a big story emerged. So we've got Simon back on at 7:30-ish this evening. He's taking time out from his busy schedule with the BBC. Lots of messages coming in tonight. You've obviously pulled a big crowd in tonight, Leigh. James Spring. I'm a Notts fan living in Weymouth. I'm very, very lucky as I'll be there on Saturday as I assist with the media at Weymouth. Must admit, I'm dreading it if Weymouth win. I'll never hear the end of it. Well, there you go. So you should be able to get into that press box at Weymouth there. There's a contact because they're not always in the National League too accommodating with you, are they, Leigh?
No, not really. I mean, the Oval game, I think, was it last Tuesday? They ended up getting called off. I wasn't allowed there. I think some clubs have taken the decision that they won't have any visiting journalists whatsoever. Solihull Moors on Tuesday. I mean, the game was obviously going to be due to play there, but Luke Daniels there was very good. Said he had no problems with me going to the game. So it's a bit of a flip of a coin. I know there's been a few problems with Weymouth. I know some other journalists have not been able to cover games there for whatever reason. So I think a few of them have just taken it upon themselves just to try and sort of be as safe as possible. So it's you're either there in person or hoping that the stream holds up.
Well, no pressure on James to ensure that you get in on Saturday. We'll hold him personally responsible if you don't get in. Good evening, gents, says Stephen Orton, big fan of the show and all of the things that we do. Right on cue from Kay Oliver Ramsden. Nice little link in because you had the press conference with him yesterday. New signings. So says Kay, any new signings this week?
Well, I mean, it's an interesting one, isn't it? I mean, Notts had lined up a deal for a fullback, and it was all signed and sealed from Notts' end. I think the boy had actually been training with him for about 2 weeks.
This was the guy from Sheffield United, wasn't it?
Yeah, that's right. And I think what happened was, in the end, as a lot of these things often end up doing, there's a chain of command, and I think as soon as it got to the top of the chain, the decision got reversed to allow him to come to Notts. So it was a bit disappointing, but So yesterday we asked Neil what the state of play was with bringing new players in. I think ideally they've only got really one loan slot left because obviously they've got 4 and you can only have 5 in the match day squad anyway. So I think the player that they'd probably like to bring in is somebody who can be either play left back or play left centre half because obviously Sam Graham's gone back now and they did have 4 centre backs before. Now they've only got Rawlinson, Lacey, and Ben Turner. So I think somebody who can sort of fill those 2 positions is where they're looking. And I would imagine it would be a loan signing rather than a permanent.
Okay. One person has left this week, Wes Thomas. So I think when you sort of broke the story a week or 2 ago, not allowed or didn't want to train with the rest of the squad because of fears over COVID, and I think that raised a few eyebrows, and it was quite unusual. You've been in professional football a long time. I've been in it even longer. Question. Are you surprised this has come to pass now that the contract's been terminated? Hey, I'm not, but you tell me what you think.
No, I think it was always heading. I think it was always heading that way. I think as soon as Ini Effiong came in, I think the writing was really on the wall. I think Notts, with the position they're in, could they afford to wait really for Wes to make a decision when it would be safe to return? I don't think they could have done so. Listen, Notts did all the right things. They gave him a bespoke fitness program. By all accounts, he was training at Meadow Lane on his own in the gym. But no, I wasn't really surprised that he'd left the club. Maybe it's probably become a little bit earlier than what I expected, if I'm honest. But I think it was always heading this way. And it's a big shame because I as a player, I love Wes. I think he's a terrific little player. Scored a lot of good goals last season. Was played a pretty integral role in them finishing 3rd in the table last year. And obviously he'd formed a very good partnership with Carl Wootton. I mean, the game against Altrincham when they won 3-1, he obviously set 2 goals up that night. It's just a shame, really, that he's not played as much this season. And there's been various factors for that, kidney stones, obviously the COVID situation. And again, I think Neil touched upon it in the press conference yesterday. If you look at the goals he scored last season, plus the absence of Christian Dennis, plus the absence of Callum Roberts, you're talking 30, 40 goals.
Obviously, the reason cited by Wes, or one of the reasons that came out through the press, because of his concerns over COVID. I mean, are you expecting him to pick another club up now he's been released from or his contract has been terminated by mutual agreement with Notts?
It's an interesting. I know Boreham Wood were apparently interested in earlier on in the month, but it's difficult to know. I mean, time will tell whether. I mean, the decision was always left with Wes to decide when he felt it was safe again. I mean, he may well feel in the next 2 weeks. I mean, the thing is, if he wants to sign for a Football League club, he's okay because obviously he's been released in the window, so he would be able to join a Football League club if one came in for him. But obviously, I think he's a London boy, isn't he? So I wouldn't be surprised to see him sort of head south if that move became available. But he's got to make the decision what's best for his family, because obviously it raised concerns about COVID and how safe it was to train with the rest of the players at Meadow Lane. So it depends on whether that stance has shifted, really.
I mean, if has been reported that Wes felt uncomfortable and not in a position to be able to train with the rest of the squad because of fears of COVID, I think the brutal reality is I don't think there's a single professional football club in this country would take him on a contract, because I think if you are not training with a group, you can't really be considered for matches.
Well, that was the whole point. I mean, even if he was training on his own bespoke, how could you consider him to play in the team at the weekend? Because when you get to Thursday and Friday and you're doing your brief session before the game, you work on a lot on team shape. How is that? How does he fit into that? How could you consider Wes Thomas for selection when, he is training on his own and doesn't feel it's safe? So that it was never, that was never ever going to happen. So it's now down to him, I guess, to decide whether, well, if somebody does come in for him, he's going to have to tell them, that he's happy to be part of whichever club wants to sign him, and they'll be happy and willing to train.
Be an interesting one. I'll be surprised if he doesn't get another club. I mean, one, he's a decent player, but two, I think he's going to have to change his stance. Whilst I don't think he'll get another club.
Yeah, I would agree with that. There's someone who'll be interested in him. You know, he's a good player. You know, he's quick. He's been around the block, scored goals. Good creator as well. He's chipped in with a few assists. You know, and for Notts, it is a blow. It is a blow. You know, to lose a player of his quality, his experience. You know, because if you look at the rest of the forward line, you know, Carl Wootton, 24, is he? 23, 24. Jimmy Knowles, teenager. Elijah Sam, 23. You know, there's not a lot of experience in that forward line. And I think, as I've raised on this show before, and even during the summer, my fear was that not having sort of that experienced striker who's been around the block, who knows where the goal is, not just from what he can give you on the pitch, but also helping the younger players, also helping the younger strikers, you know, just for them to sort of watch on a daily basis and see what they do, see how they do it, you know, and that is a little bit, you know, it's a big concern, I think, moving forwards. I think Neil did touch upon it yesterday about the goals and trying to get the balance right. I mean, listen, defensively, absolutely fantastic. I looked at the record today, second best defensive record in the league. But if you're looking at the teams in the top 10, I think they've only scored 19 goals, which is the worst out of the teams in the top 10. So that was always a concern. So Wes Thomas was a player that we was all hoping that would come back and play a part, because, you know, a fit Wes Thomas, when he's at it, real handful. But they've got Effiong in. I mean, I didn't see the game on Saturday, so I'm not sure how he got on, but I'm told that he made a very, very good impression. So we'll just have to wait and see what happens moving forward.
With that in mind, I mean, Conor McManus is asking the question you've kind of already answered. With Wes leaving now, and he's kind of projecting forward a little bit, in the summer, will we sign or need to sign a new striker? I think you've been fairly clear and consistent throughout that Christian Dennis offered us an option.
Yes.
That perhaps hasn't been filled 100%. Although I think part of that equation you do, and we'll come on to it in a minute, is we've lost Kel Roberts for a long period of time this season as well, which has kind of exacerbated finishing ability, creativity, goal power, if you like.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I said it in the summer that I felt that losing Christian Dennis was a significant blow, purely because, okay, all right, he didn't start a lot of games. If you remember, at the start of the season, it was Wes and Carl up front, wasn't it, for a long period. And then as the season drew on, Christian forced himself into the team, either coming off the bench, and then he, in the playoffs, obviously started both games, scored the goal in the semi-final against Barnet. But he gave you a real deadliness, a dead eye in front of goal. You know, he was a fox in a box. You know, the goal against Barnet, for instance, I think just outside the 6-yard box. And you'd have to look across the line of strikers at Notts at the moment, and you don't really see one in there who has perhaps got that ability. I know people talk about Jimmy Knowles, but I think moving forward, when the club looks back, wherever they end the season, I would expect them to finish in the playoffs. Whether they've got enough quality moving forwards in that department, I'm personally not so sure. Because I think you need somebody of experience and clout. Because let's face it, if you are judging against yourselves against the best teams in the division, such as Stockport, how many of Notts' players up front would get into those teams? Carl Wootton, definitely. Would Elijah Sam? Would have anybody have taken a punt on Elijah Sam? Would Jimmy Knowles be starting up front for Stockport? So, you know, for me, I think when you're building a team, I think it's imperative you get the spine right. And Neil's done a fabulous job of building the defence, brilliant defence, centre of midfield's fine. But that number 9 position, that 20-goal man who can make a difference. You know, Carl did brilliantly last year to score as many goals as he did. But we forget he's still learning. His performances haven't been as perhaps quite consistent as they were last year. So I think moving forwards, that is a position when it comes to the summer, I think that area is going to need some significant investment in terms of if they want to get out of this league, if they don't do it this year via the playoffs, they have to invest in a proven number 9.
Effiong, I was impressed with him Saturday.
I didn't see him, but a lot of people said he was good.
He's strong. He's a presence. And for me, he kind of impacted the game and undoubtedly took some of the focal point pressure that's on Kyle Wootton a lot of the time. It's an interesting career when you look. I mean, he's had an awful lot of clubs. You know, it's all stations from London to Ross County, basically. But in amongst that, because there seems to be clubs where he stays quite short. But if you look at his record at Dover, for instance,
very good.
He did very well. He did so clearly. There's something there that he can get you goals as well as being, if you like, a target man. And I think if Notts can get him to perform like he did at Yeovil, where he was 1 in 2, 1 in 3 games, then I think you've got a very, very effective goal-scoring striker at this level.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I'd agree with that. I mean, we all saw last year how much of a handful he was. And, you know, Neil's track record with strikers is actually very good. He's worked with some of the best, Lyle Taylor, Tom Elliott. You know, he picked up Carl Wootton, and not a lot of people would have thought that was wouldn't have identified him as a striker to bring in. Probably wouldn't have been your first choice, but Neil saw something in him. He's proven to be a great investment. So, obviously, he's been a big admirer of Vinny for a long time. I know he watched him when he was manager of Wimbledon, when he was at Woking. So he's obviously kept tabs of his progress. I mean, I liked him when he was at Dover. I think he's strong, he's quick. You know, people bounce off him. And I think in this league, that does give you something, an extra option. But again, I keep going back to that. It's, you know, my issue with Notts is that they don't struggle to create chances, sticking them away. I mean, I did see the chance at the end of the game. I mean, that you should be scoring those chances. If I go back to Halifax, Callum Roberts, when he goes through at 1-0, great chance to kill the game off, 2-0. Dagenham, I mean, there was a series of chances missed that night. So we're not seeing, it's not as if Notts aren't, you know, struggling creatively to sort of get at teams and create opportunities. Just when they come, they just aren't that ruthless. And that's where I think the difference of having the Leigh Hughes figure type of, if we're talking about the levels, they are the ones who ultimately make a difference.
Lots of questions tonight. There's clearly a southern branch of the Notts County Supporters Club in and around Weymouth. Alan Cotty. I'm a Notts fan living in Dorchester. That's quite a nice part of the world. Gutted to be missing the match so close to home this Saturday. Maybe James could sneak me in, or Weymouth streaming the match. Could be a bit dangerous for James. If anyone's going to be sneaked into the press box, I suggest it should be you, Leigh. Yes, all the games are being streamed, so you will be able to get details of that after the Solihull Moors game. Paul Taylor, here's an interesting one. And not that one. This is Paul Tay 23, not your former colleague at the Nottingham Post.
Big tails, yeah.
Hey, I loved his comment. Did you see his tweet? The gist was that Forest lost Swansea, nothing to do with the performance, but a dodgy penalty decision by the ref completely transformed the game. Yeah, righto. Anyway, enough of that. We shouldn't get involved. Anyway, Paul Tay 23 says, can we sign a striker from a National League North or South Division club now their season is suspended? I'm sure not while it's suspended. Interesting point. If they scrub National League or North and South, would Notts be in a position to sign any of those players?
Yeah, because I don't think there's any. The contracts would still be. I would presume I would have to check it out, but I can't see why any player would be preventing from moving, because it would be, I would think, a restriction of trade if. And I'm not sure how the contracts work as part-time contracts. I think it's different. You have to put a 7-day approach in, don't you? I think in the lower third that you go down. So unless they're on a full-time contract.
Yeah, York I think York are full-time. They've just moved to their new stadium, which looks very nice, by the way. Yeah, but I don't think too many of the others are.
Yeah, I think it would depend on the status of the club, whether they're full-time, whether the player's on a full-time contract. If it's a normal non-league contract, then I think that you have to put a 7-day approach in. That's my understanding of it. I'd have to double check that. But no, there's to be no reason. Of course, there's no transfer window either in the National League. So it's not as if they've got 10 days or whatever it is to do their business before it shuts. So they can sign players. I think the last sort of phase or period before they can't do any more business, I think, is March or the very end of March. But that might change now because of how long the season's going on, whether that goes on for another two or 3 weeks or so. Whether that's
it's a good shout because, what division did we get Cal Roberts from?
Well, listen, there's a lot of good
players down there.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at Chesterfield, what James Rowe's done there since he's gone, and he's taken a lot of Gloucester's players. I think he got, is it Asante, the forward?
Yeah.
Yeah, there are a lot of good players there. If you look, I mean, obviously Notts proved that with Callum Roberts. I mean, when I covered Lincoln under Keith Alexander, the turning the century, sort of 2004, 2005, a lot of Lincoln's success stories and players who went on to have fabulous careers. I mean, Gareth McCauley, prime example, came from a league in Ireland. Obviously went on to play in the Premier League with West Brom. Simon Yeo came from Hyde United. So, there are a lot of good players about there. It's obviously a lot of scouting, unfortunately, nowadays is done on video clips. Right? Whereas back then, you'd often see managers at every game watching the players themselves because they didn't have the access to the technology. So, again, obviously, I think the owners recently did an interview and said that Brexit and the new restrictions put on in that respect would affect them, wouldn't enable them to go out and sign players from sort of Europeans, so they wouldn't be able to go out and get Rodriguez and Elijah Salmon.
It's work permits, isn't it? It's work permits.
I think maybe that's probably why they moved for them this summer, knowing that was coming into force and probably wouldn't have been able to get them this. So it was now or never, basically. I think they maybe thought, well, we've got a decision to make on these two because next summer, the likelihood is that we're not going to be able to get them. So, but of course, they're going to be restricted to largely the British market, and there are some very, very good players in the National League North and South for sure.
Now, we mentioned Kel Roberts, and we've had some questions as well with regards to Kel. So clearly, Notts fans impatient, updates, news. When's Kel coming back? He's been injured since basically before a National League ball was kicked this season. Delays, rehabbing, operation. I think the player himself was quite ambitious in wanting to come back. Clearly none of that's materialized, and I guess people are just sort of like forensically examining every comment that Neil makes in relation to Kel. And I think it was yourself that asked the question yesterday at the press conference, and the response, I guess, was Kel's not going to be coming back anytime particularly soon.
No, I think we've probably reached a stage with Callum Roberts now where, as Neil said, he wants a week where he can get him back on the pitch, where I think the phrase was 1 step forward, 2 steps back and vice versa. So he probably needs to be in a position where he's training for a few days at a time and is having no problems after. I mean, I've never heard of the operation that he's had. It's the first time I've ever come across a player having to have his stomach lining strengthened to help him overcome the inflammation, I think, in his groin and hips. So it's a new one on me, and I imagine it may be a new one for some of the medical staff because it seems quite an unusual operation to undergo. But listen, it's vital they're getting back out on the pitch. I mean, creatively, for me, he's probably the best player in the National League when he's on form. Great to watch, lovely feet, creative, scores goals, causes problems, and there's no doubt in my mind when he's full and firing fit, he makes not so much more potent attacking team to watch, and one that looks like it'll score plenty of goals.
And we're a much more potent programme, no disrespect, Leigh, when we've got Simon Stone on 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks ago, when you said loans, not grants, and I thought, hey, hang on a minute. And crikey, that one's been debated for a fair bit since, and big stories. You heard it first here on the Magpie Circle, or watched it, and it's down to you. It's down to you, young man. So thank you for coming back on tonight.
No worries.
No pressure on another exclusive. I know you've got lots of things on and we're working for the BBC. So we've got 15 minutes of your time. So you've been busy today, National League. Before we go on to the Helen Grant story, which you've broke today, the MP, what is the latest, as you understand it, regards the National League and where we are with grants, loans, National League? I'll call it the main division being finished. We know North and South are currently having a 2-week break.
Right. So I know the executive of the National League, so the board, are going to be writing to the clubs this week to get their views on potential votes for deciding what happens next, basically. I think they're trying to counsel opinion, and then the wording of votes is very interesting, isn't it? So is it going to be a clear case of you want to carry on or not, or is there going to be more to it? Do you want to pause for a bit? I think everything that I'm hearing, there's not going to be a change in terms of going back to a grant. I suppose we're raking over old coals, but it seems as though there was either a willful miscommunication or simply a misunderstanding of what was being said during a meeting last year, when the clubs and the FA, the league and the FA, came away with the idea that the government were going to basically stand the league financially if no fans were due or would be back in the grounds everybody expected. I think when the league started, at some point there would be fans in grounds, and clearly there were at some grounds fans, and I think the idea was that there would be fans in by now and future funding wasn't really going to be an issue. So when the government said we will make funding available for the next 3 months, the feeling was that was a continuation of what they were already receiving, which you've got to remember is funding from the National Lottery rather than government funding, or the government would step in. And that is what was communicated to the clubs. That's why the clubs think that they were promised grants. They weren't actually promised grants. Neither did anybody say that there was going to be loans. And I think we go all the way back to September, October. I think if the clubs had known that they were voting for something which might turn into a loan by the end of December, I'm not sure the season would have started. So that, as my understanding, is where we are, and probably by the end of next week or early the week after, certainly, there will be a vote, and I assume the vote will be, do we start? And if we don't start, what happens?
Should we read anything into there's now a difference in direction? So North and South are suspended. The main national division is carrying on. Why has there been that split?
Well, I think clearly National League North, there was 12 teams put a statement out to say that we don't want to carry on.
Yeah, there's about 10 of them in the bottom half of the table, I think. But yeah,
but you can't make teams play when they don't want to play. I mean, that's
if you're having a vote, Simon. If you're having a vote and the consensus of the vote is to carry on, you kind of are telling them and making them play, aren't you?
Well, but if that's 12 teams from one league and there's 22 teams in the league, that's a majority, isn't it?
Yeah, my point I'm trying to get across is this still one for all with the National League? Do you foresee a possible scenario where the National League main division carries on and North and South is suspended?
I can see a scenario where National League North and South, the suspension is extended for an indeterminate period of time. I see a scenario where the National North and South leagues are terminated.
Yeah.
But
That's
equally, I can see a scenario where the National League is stopped, paused, however you want to view it. I think it would be a brave move to terminate the National League completely, just because of all the things that we went through last season in terms of playing the playoffs and, points per game. I think it's too early. It's too early, I think, to call a league season now on points per game. We're not even halfway through. So I would have thought there's some kind of wriggle room potentially being allowed there, but it's down to the clubs. And I understand what you're saying about, if there's a vote and the majority vote to carry on, then you have to carry on. But if you're in a league of 23 teams and 12 vote to carry on and 11 say they don't want to, well, why are you forcing the 11? You're forcing the 11 to play when they don't want to play and they've got no money. I don't know how you would execute that. And then if 11 teams pulled out of the league, I don't know if you've got a league. So it's an interesting one. It's a very complicated situation.
I think that for me, there is a huge difference between the aspiration, size, business model of a National League North and a National League South club compared to a main National League. Because in the National League, you've probably got certainly over half the clubs that historically have been Football League clubs, haven't you? And there, I think, is the massive dilemma for the National League. My own gut feel is I don't see how National League North and National League South can carry on, if I'm honest with you. I don't see how they can see it out. For me, I think the huge decision is whether the National League decide, one, let's try and finish with our main National League. It's an official feeder league to the Football League. Bigger clubs, Notts can ride it out, your Stockports, your Hartlepools, those sorts of clubs. The league themselves, didn't they, made the point, and they're not the best at communicating, as we all know here. They made the point that they actually stated what their preferred aim was, wasn't it, when they announced those options?
That was blown out the window, though. They wrote to the clubs on Friday night and basically said that there was no support, no widespread support for loans, either the clubs taking them or the league taking them. And there's all kinds of competition issues around that. And therefore, but because there was no support for it, it's off the table now. They're not going to discuss it. So from the three options that were on the table, it was basically left, well, shall we stop or not? I just think it's there are numerous issues clearly, and I spoke about this last week with the National League, but I think this one is staring them right in the face. It's not going away, I'm fairly sure. And it's big decisions, and I understand, again, I understand the points you're making, but simple common sense tells me that I don't have the league table in front of me, but aren't there a couple of recently former Football League clubs down towards the bottom of the league? Well, why on earth would they vote to carry on? And bearing in mind, if the North and South leagues are terminated, why would a team at the bottom, towards the bottom end of the National League, vote to incur costs to carry on a season where they're already at the bottom of the league? They've got very little chance of being promoted and they can't go down. Why would you do that? I don't see why you would volunteer to do that.
You come to points about integrity of the competition and why you're playing football. You're starting off playing the season, playing football with a commitment to finish the season. Yeah. I appreciate that becomes substantially clouded by whether the clubs felt that they were presented with an accurate synopsis of the funding available to them for the season. But they started the season.
But they've started the season believing that it was going to be funded until the end of the season. And now they've found out that's not the case. Now you can have whatever arguments you want. And in fairness, the clubs weren't in the meeting with the DCMS. It's National League and FA representatives, and they've relayed the information as they saw it to the clubs, and the clubs have acted on that. If the information proves to be incorrect, well, I think you've got every right to make a different decision. And as I say, the people that I've spoken to, almost 100% have said that had they known that loans were part of the package in order for the season to start, the season would never have started. That's what I was told.
Do you think, you'll never prove this one way or the other, do you think there is in any way, shape or form any retribution from the government as a result of the way the National League executive handled the initial distribution of the grants money? The reason I ask that is a report was commissioned by the National League. David Bernstein, former FA chairman, clearly a lot of friends in high places. Part of his role as chairman of the FA is to have direct access into governmental circles. Writes a very critical report into the way those monies were distributed. The league kind of try and whitewash it a bit. David Bernstein feels that he's forced to go public with some of his criticisms. Oliver Dowden then becomes involved, investigation by government. Do you think some of this is down to retribution or not?
Well, I mean, it's very interesting, and I don't think anybody would actually say that. But I know for a fact that DCMS were not impressed at all in the way that the finances were distributed. But you have to make a distinction. It was not government money. It was not public money that was handed out. It was Camelot's money. It was national lottery money, and it was brokered as part of a deal that would see at some point National League clubs promote the national lottery and also presumably be a conduit for tickets in some way, shape or form, whether that's as result of prizes or whatever. So it's not the government's decision. So would the government look more favourably on a different National League board and who went and asked for
a hybrid of loans and grants? Yeah.
I mean, it's impossible to say. That the problem is that in order to get a different board and a different chairman, you have to have presumably an emergency general meeting. There would have to be a vote. That vote would have to be carried. Then you would have to have a new constitution and a new board voted. Then you would have to have a new chairman. And all this takes time. And in the meantime, what happens to the clubs who were supposed to be playing football? Maybe it's something that could be done if the season was paused, but then it's the board that's pausing the season. So, I mean, this is, we're going, without turning all politician, we're going down the realms of hypotheses, and you have to deal in the here and now. And the here and now is that there's no fans, no idea when fans are going to come back. No, we're talking about funding, £11 million funding from January from now until the end of March. But the season's due to finish in May. So what happens with the other 2 months? So we have to take another loan out.
If the league was scrapped this season, do you think there is any possibility that National Lottery / government would seek to reclaim that 10 million quid?
As far as I'm aware, no, because as I say, it was brokered as a kind of, it was a deal. So there is a payback for the National League at such time as I say, fans are allowed back in stadiums or games are being played, however you want to do it. The minutiae of what that deal is will come out in the fullness of time. But there is an obligation on the National League to fulfil promises it made. But clearly it made promises based on based on a season being completed and fans being in stadiums, and as everybody says, in various aspects of the situation we're in, where we are in unprecedented time.
We're all, in theory, well, you two are, specialists in journalism and communications. How do you explain the National League's apparent complete lack of transparency and accountability in explaining these situations? So I've heard very little from Brian Barwick, who clearly, having had a very successful career in television, understands the media. In fact, I've heard nothing. I've heard nothing, as far as I am aware, from Mark Ives, who's interim chief exec, or whatever you want to call it, running it on a day-to-day basis. Leigh tells me the National League have a dedicated press officer. A lot of the things that we're discussing, they could put to bed for not just Notts County, but for all National League clubs. Why is there just such a kind of a code of silence and Chinese whispers and etc.?
It's a good question. And these are the questions that have been asked of the National League for a while, certainly predating this situation. And certainly they were raised of the National League virtually as soon as lockdown came. And they've never been addressed fully. But like any league structure, it has a board. It has to execute. The board has to execute decisions on behalf of its member clubs, and if the member clubs don't agree with the way that the board's running the league, then they have it within their power to get rid of them. And that goes for the National League, the Football League, Premier League, any league you want, really. It's, the power is with the clubs. It's whether the clubs decide that they want to execute it or not. Clearly, the funding of the initial £10 million and the way that was distributed is a, well, it's a subject of huge debate, huge rancor and annoyance, and it has never satisfactorily been explained. And at the moment, it's being hidden behind that. The decision, the third tranche of money in December the allocation of that couldn't be changed, because even though the Bernstein report came out and clearly was critical of the funding model, it was so close to the third payment being made that there was a feeling legally that to change it at such short notice could potentially run into problems. I've been told that if a payment had been received for January, which hasn't obviously in any form, then the funding model would have been changed. But nobody's getting funding at the moment, and we don't know whether it would have been changed because we haven't seen it. But that is what I was told. Do
you have a question for Simon, Leigh, at all, or?
No, I was just going to ask Simon whether he thinks there may be ramifications further down the line in terms of the National League's relationship with the EFL. We spoke to Neil Hardley last week about what would happen if the season was made null and void, and whether there would be some form of problem that could occur in terms of the promotion spots.
Well, that is another really good question. And the reason why, almost a subsidiary reason, last April, when leagues were deciding what to do up and down the country, there was clearly a lot of talk about whether Stevenage should be relegated. At the time, it was going to be Stevenage because it was only going to be one team.
Yeah.
And it was whether Stevenage should be relegated from League Two, and there was a feeling that it would be unfair on them. And the League Two clubs, if you remember, had a vote amongst themselves and said that they don't want Stevenage to be relegated, and that would be unfair. Now, the championship clubs, who between them have the way the EFL works, there's 72 clubs. You have a vote, and it's for decisions of major significance. There is the vote of the 72, but independently, there's a vote of the 24 in the championship, and both those voting blocks have to vote in favour of a situation. So in order for what League Two wanted as a block to happen, the 72 would have had to vote in favour of that, but also the 24 in the championship would have had to vote in favour. And there was absolutely no way on earth that the championship clubs were going to vote in favour of that resolution to stop Stevenage being relegated, because they were petrified that if the EFL blocked relegation out of League Two, the Premier League would then say, well, if it's okay for you to block relegation out of your league, if you don't mind, we'll block relegation out of ours. So that was never going to happen. I think the difference is this time, and again, I think we spoke about this last week, there has been no bar put on when points per game comes into effect. And again, this was supposed to be led by the Premier League, because ultimately everything comes from the Premier League. And the Premier League were talking about it, and they discussed halfway through the season, they discussed 3/4 of the way through the season. And in the end, it was getting a little bit complicated, and there wasn't really a consensus. So in the belief that it wouldn't happen again, they parked it. But in parking it, it meant that every other league parked the same question. And clearly, of all the leagues that finish, the Premier League is the most likely league to finish. So they're the ones that are unlikely to get the problem. And I can absolutely guarantee that if they had the same conversation now, well, Sheffield United are not voting for halfway through the season points per game. They're voting for 75% of the season. And all the vested interest that came out before will come out again. So going back to the initial point, I think logic says if you haven't reached halfway in the season, therefore not every team has played every other team once. You can't promote. You can't have points per game. It's just not possible, because Team A could have played the teams that are in first, second, third, fourth, and fifth. Team B could have played the teams of bottom 5 places, and suddenly one of them's got a massively better points per game. Like that wouldn't be fair. So you can't end a league like that. So will there be promotion and relegation? I struggle to see how that can happen, but there may be an argument from the EFL or some of the EFL clubs saying we'd quite like to keep that option open, and that's why I wonder whether the National League may attempt to try and limp on to 50% of the season, maybe 2/3 of the season, and then stop in the way they did last year, so they can have a clear points per game decision, and then it can claim the promotion places. Because I do think there is an issue, and I wonder whether the EFL may say, well, of course you can terminate your season, but we're going to take one of your places off you for the next 5 years.
Yeah, I think that's the big concern
in terms of decisions that have got to be made.
Yeah, I think that's the big concern. I think when Neil spoke last week, and you would look at it and think, well, the National League sees itself as almost like the unofficial, in inverted commas, extension of the EFL. So if the EFL is going to finish, which we expect it to, then the National League, surely, as this unofficial extension of the Football League, should be finishing too. But as you rightly say, it doesn't look like that's going to happen. So therefore, the conversations that are going to have to take place look like they could be very, very difficult ones.
Yeah, I think it becomes very complicated. I think this is a personal view. Yeah, it was just kind of, I suppose, logic. Really, is that the National League will try and limp on. I'm not convinced that it will get to the end, but it may get to a point where you can kind of draw a line under it, or everybody plays each other once. Because then the other thing is what happens if, I don't know, if for instance a team at the moment has played, say, I don't know, Torquay are top, aren't they?
Yeah.
So say Notts County are in fourth.
I wish we were.
Okay. And one game was called off, and there's another one in about 3 weeks' time, and you know that the season is going to end on points per game after, I don't know, 25 games. You're not in any rush to get those games against Torquay, are you? So I wonder if there might be a situation where they could manipulate the season so everybody has played each other once, and you've all played roughly the same amount of home games and away games. I could kind of see that, and equally because there was precedent set last year in terms of nobody relegated from National League North, and I think because it's one competition, National League North and South obviously, and because it's one competition, you could say there's not going to be any relegation from the National League this season into National Leagues North and South or promotion. So I think that's doable. It's how you manage the promotion and relegation issue that might not be so easy. And nothing, as I've articulated, nothing is independent, and ultimately everything comes from the Premier League. So I don't see how the National League will come up with a decision without first consulting the EFL to find what the ramifications would be of a situation. And I would virtually guarantee before you got an answer to that, the EFL would be speaking to the Premier League to find out what their view of a certain situation would be as well. Because if, for instance, the EFL say, independently of the Premier League, we're going to not have relegation, and then the Premier League say, well, you said that, so we're going to do that. Well, that would be a disaster. So not it may seem as though these things are independent, and to an extent they are, but nothing, it's a pyramid, and nothing happens without conversations with the leagues up, and ultimately the Premier League, and what the Premier League view is will be probably shape what happens in the National League.
I mean, my worry, I mean, it does feel like it's a house of cards waiting to come down, because we saw, I think, in the National League, North and South, I think Concord Rangers are already saying, look, if we're not going to get this money, then we're just going to boycott the season. So we won't play this game this weekend. We'll stop playing for 2 weeks. So, if you get a team at the bottom of the National League who says, hang on a minute, you told us this money was going to come throughout the season, that it was going to be in grants. Well, we can't afford to continue. We can't afford to limp on. So then we pull out. So then what happens? So then you get 2 or 3 teams who can't say, right, we can't afford to do it. So then, how does the league finish in? It's incredible situation.
No, absolutely. And then if you've got 6 teams that decide they do want to carry on, and I don't know, you come up with a little kind of league for them to play in, like mini playoffs or whatever, is that justifiable to claim a promotion spot? These are, I mean, I'm not a football administrator. I'm just a journalist like you. I don't have the answers to these questions, but these are all conversations that will have to take place. And that is why these conversations over the next 10 days or so are happening between the league and the clubs to try and come up with a vote or a choice that the clubs can make, because it is not as linear as saying, are we playing or are we not?
And then you've got the added problem having COVID postponements as well. I mean, the season's already been so badly affected by that. So
Yeah.
You've got this.
I mean,
Yeah.
I'd mentioned to someone that I wondered whether the National League on block could stop playing and look to restart in April, by which time the cases had come down. There may be the chance of getting fans back into stadiums, and then on the basis that the playoffs were played in June last year, that you could look to finish the season at the end of June. Now, by doing that, you do create a problem, because the teams that got promoted, they've just, that finished first or go up in the playoffs, they have very little time to get used to life in the EFL, in the same way that the teams that finish at the bottom of the EFL, there was this argument put forward as well. They're going into a league that's not finished till June. They're kind of battle hardened, whereas their teams finished at the beginning of May, and they've had like 6 weeks, and they've got to get a squad sorted out. So there are arguments around that, but I just wondered whether that was a viable way forward. And then if you get to March, bearing in mind nobody really knows, nobody knows, and that includes the government. Nobody knows what the situation is going to be in April. If you can start, you look at it, and if you can't, then you've not lost anything. I just wonder whether that is a way forward. The other thing, and this has been mentioned a couple of times to me as well, is if, and this is an argument to make to government, but whether they view it in these terms, I don't know. If the season stopped and all the full-time members of staff go on furlough, that will actually cost more than giving the league another £10 million. But that's a different argument.
I mean, and I'm conscious we've kept you longer than we should have done. But I mean, part of this, because Notts have got Havant and Waterlooville away in the FA Trophy. So Havant have been quite vociferous in not wanting to play, protect, etc., etc. So they weren't going to play the games anyway. Then there was the suspension. But with prize money at stake, FA Trophy, all the rest of it, I'll have a little bet with you, Simon, that Havant and Waterlooville do play Notts County in the FA Trophy, and is it 2 weeks time, Leigh? I'll bet you that game takes place. So I'm not saying being critical, but your point here is that clubs will choose arguments to suit their own personal circumstances at any one time. But if I can ask you, because you're normally ahead of the curve, you're looking into the Simon Stone crystal ball. What's going to happen in the next 10 days or whenever this vote takes place? What do you think is the most likeliest scenario?
Wow, I think it'll be stopped.
All of it.
I don't think it'll be. I don't think it'll be scrapped. I think it'll be stopped.
Okay.
Yeah, I just don't. Yeah, that's what I think. But that is, yeah. If it's not stopped, then you're not holding a gun to my head. It's just how I think. I just don't see. If I was running a club and I didn't have any money coming through the turnstiles, and there was no way of making any money from anywhere, really, bit of TV income, I suppose. And why would I want to carry on when I can put my stuff on furlough until, where are we? The end of March, end of April?
So you think all three divisions will stick together? There's not a combination, or there's not a scenario whereby North and South stop?
No, there is a scenario. I said that at the start. You asked me what I thought.
But you don't think that will happen? You think all three will be stopped?
I just don't. I don't know how you carry 24 teams to carry on playing
with no money coming in.
With no money, that is the thing that I can't. And how many? If 6 of them say we don't want to play, well, are you going to force them to play? I don't. You could carry on with the 18, but what happens to the other 6? I just find that a very complicated situation. I think it's a struggle for the league. I think I think the league can carry a league as a block. I think the North and South can be treated differently to the National League. But I'm still not convinced, as Leigh said before, that, you know, it feels like a bit like a pack of cards. So once it all starts to fall, like, you don't want to be the one at the end holding a card on his own, do you?
No.
I just think I don't think they will scrap it.
I do. I think it will end up being scrapped. I think it will end up being scrapped, regardless of how far teams have got in terms of the league positions to go and get to the playoffs. As you rightly say, if you're an owner of a football club and you've just, I don't know, teams spent heavily on the squads in the summer because they were led to believe they were going to get this money all the way through the season. If all of a sudden now the rug's been pulled underneath their feet and they've got big contracts to pay and they've got no money coming in, why would you play? And why would you play?
No.
Why would you wait to play and then resume again? You know, it didn't make any sense to me. If it was me, I'd be saying, well, there's no point. We might as well scrap it.
No, I understand your point. I think Macy said, like 10 days. I think 10 days is quite a tight time scale to decide that that's it until August.
Yeah, I was basing 10 days
for the political reasons that I've outlined. I'm not saying that the season won't be scrapped.
Yeah,
I'm saying that, in my opinion, and it is an opinion, they will pause the season.
Yeah.
That is my opinion, but it may be wrong. That's what I think, and then they have to decide what to do.
Yeah. See, I would agree with that.
Happen from a lot of. Sorry.
I would agree with that. I think, like you say, it will stop, but then I can see teams just saying, do you know what? We're not going to carry on. If we've got no money coming in, there's no improvement in terms of the pandemic. You know, you see the number of cases, number of deaths today. I just don't see the point. You know, if they can put the players on furlough for however long it is, government takes care of it. They've got nothing to worry about then, have they? You know, rather than try to dig a big financial hole for themselves, and they're not going to want to take a loan if they've got to pay it back either, are they? So,
no, I wouldn't have thought so. I mean, why would you do that? I'd take a loan to play.
Narrows the options.
I don't really understand. I don't understand the logic of taking a loan to play football. If you're a football club, my local club around the corner from me, Altrincham, it's not an ex-football league. Excuse me, it's not an ex-football league club. It's a local football club. It's a community club. It exists to play football for people to go and watch it and go for a drink in the bar. Why is it existing? Why would it take a loan to play football? Nobody. That makes no sense whatsoever.
It is a radical one. It won't happen. But if you've been really bullish about things, you would. I don't think there's any way the National League North and South will carry on. They're toast as far as I can see this year. The National League main division, you instruct all clubs to fulfil fixtures. There's a position in place there's 2 promotion slots to go up to the Football League. That's part of our football pyramid. So those clubs, right, that want to carry on, you carry on. If you want to drop out, that's fine. You drop out, your record is expunged for this season. At the minute, if you look at the 23 teams, there are about 17 that can make the playoffs. It's a very bizarre division at the minute, very bizarre. Down to 16th, something like that, you're only 3 or 4 points off a 7th place playoff. I think, despite a lot of protestations, that would focus the mind of a very large number of the National League main division teams. And it won't happen, but if you you don't want to see the season out, that's fine. You drop out. And if it's 16 teams, you work out how many fixtures need to be played, top 7, and you carry on as normal, and you preserve the integrity of the promotion and relegation system within the professional football pyramid in this country.
I've got a radical one. 2 points per game over last 2 seasons, promote Notts County as champions. Jobs are good in.
I like that. That was like, I was told there was a team, I'm not even going to say which league they were in, but when it was discussions were taking place over how seasons should be finished, they said that there should be playoffs involving 4 teams, and but instead of the actual games being played, they should be the results of the fixtures between the teams that were involved in the playoffs, mythically, should be used to decide who wins the game and who gets into the final. And then the final wouldn't be played, and the result of the games between those 2 teams should be used to decide which team would go up. And you would never guess that the team who came up with that idea would have been promoted. That's quite incredible.
Is this why, Simon? And I just want to get this final question, and I'm conscious
I do have to go. I said 50, and I've been here 35 so far.
Yeah, well, it's only because you've been giving long answers. You did a good story with Helen Grant, the MP, today. She's called for an independent football regulator. And this, yes, I guess, is in part is what some of the conversations we've just been happening. They're all clubs, league, they're all in it for themselves in a way. Yeah. Her yes. idea sounds very noble. You've done a big piece today. It's in all the regional press. What's your take on that? Is it achievable or not?
Well, it's a good idea. I'm not going to say it's a good idea in principle, but as soon as you put it into practice, it doesn't work. But the problem is that Gary Neville was speaking, and I like Gary Neville a lot, but he was speaking on behalf of this idea that should have an independent regulator. This is Gary Neville, the television pundit and football club owner. So I'm not quite sure on what basis he talks from. David Bernstein, we've mentioned him, he's involved in that. I think I could see Bernstein doing something like that. But also he's an ex-chairman of the FA, and what does he think about the chairman of the FA? I think the problem is with football, as in life, there's a lot of vested interests out there, and I think finding someone who is wholly independent, and not only wholly independent going in, but stays wholly independent. Bearing in mind this, Helen Grant said today that this independent regulator will be funded by football, so that's very noble, but football is a pretty vague term. So where's the money coming from? What proportion is paid by the Premier League? What proportion is paid by the FA? What proportion is paid by the National League? What's paid by the EFL? That there will be lent on. I think it's very difficult. It's a great idea, but I don't know how it works in practice.
Right, we better let you go because you went on far too much longer. Thank you very much as always. Let's await developments over the next few days. And thank you for taking the time to join us today, Simon. Thank you.
No worries. Leigh, good speaking to you both.
Yeah.
Right, take care. Leigh, stay on the line. Solihull Moors. Let's get back to reality. We've had quite a few messages coming through as well. Stephen Orton, my worry is that the EFL will become a closed shop like the days of re-election. And I guess that was a point that you raised a little bit earlier. Alan Cotty, what is the take-up of the not streaming service? How many each per home game? It's a good service, hopefully helping keeping the club ticking over. It is, for Notts, it's a decent source of revenue. I think they're reporting something like, is it up to 2,000 a game?
Yeah, the numbers are really, really good, which I think just underlines, just what a big club they are for this league. It is a good source of revenue, but it's like everything else. The Notts are a big club. They've got some big contracts there still historically for the likes of Enzio Baldwin. So I think Notts would be okay throughout this process because we've seen the owners have been very good and. When all the clubs were putting the players on furlough last season, they didn't do that. They paid the players throughout all that process, and I would expect them to do the same again. The problem is, as my granddad says, it's not us, it's everybody else. So I think that's the issue, I think, in terms of finishing the league overall. But yeah, you're right. The streaming does bring a decent source of income. I think you talk to other clubs, and I talk to other press officers, about the numbers they have when Notts are playing in, they skyrocket.
Kelsdyke, he's in a few chirps tonight. Right, some good ones. So, all these smaller clubs that have been overpaid in grants, will they be paying the money back if the season ends? Seems like some clubs have done well out of this. I wonder who he means. Just signed a former Notts County centre half, haven't they? And then a supplementary from Kelsdyke. Time for League 3 to get away from this mess. What a disaster. I've long advocated League 3, but you can never argue fundamentally now from an independent point of view. It won't happen because it's Turkish voting for Christmas and there's 72 clubs in the Football League, then having to divide even more of a pot. I think there is a big argument for that because National League, National Division, compared to North and South, they're chalk and cheese, aren't they?
100%. Yeah, 100%. I think the time is probably approaching. You know, if you look at some of the size of the teams in the National League, Notts County, Hartlepool, Stockport, Chesterfield, Wrexham, Yeovil, there's 6, is it, off the bat?
Yeah. You know, Torquay you'd put in that bracket.
Yeah. So, another one, ex-Football League club. So 7. You get into the stage now where it's almost like an extension of League 2, really. Maybe the time has come, whether you sort of amalgamate those clubs and make it a League 2 North and South. There are going to be some clubs that wouldn't be very happy with that, but I don't see how you can bring the likes of those who are not very well supported into a League 2 North and South. I think it would have to be the clubs that, you know, historically have produced big attendances, etc.
Let's wrap up because we've hardly really had time to talk about Solihull Moors Wednesday evening. I mean, it's good to see both clubs, you know, showing enthusiasm and desire to get a game on between the two clubs, isn't it? Because previously we've had the discussions where, you know, these games seem to be being systematically postponed. The National League will not allow you to infill fixtures. This is a victory for common sense.
Yeah, brilliant. I mean, I think Neil has been working tremendously hard to try and arrange games, but of course it's vested interests. And I think on the last one they had a game arranged on the Friday, and that was it. On the Friday when they found out that the Oval game, I think it's the Oval game that was postponed, they'd arranged a game or a team to step in. By the time Monday came around, didn't want to play the game again. So I think Notts have been trying desperately hard to try and fill these blank midweeks because they know they've got such a hectic schedule ahead of them where they're going to be playing Saturday, Tuesday, Saturday for about 6 weeks. So, I think what both clubs deserve a huge amount of credit for sorting it out amongst themselves. I wish the same level of common sense would be applied throughout the league, really. I mean, by rights, if you'd seen Solihull Moors' pitch, I saw a picture of it today, there's no way that game would have been able to have been played tomorrow night. Caked in snow, not a chance. So, but instead of letting the game fall victim to weather, and everybody's now got to go back to the calendars, they just went, right, okay, let's do it this way then. Swap it, and we'll do it that way. And which is what they did, and I think that's absolutely brilliant. I wish it had happened more in the National League.
James Spring, Weymouth Pie. This is for the live edition, folks. It might sound a bit odd. It's just let us know that Weymouth are currently 1 up at Aldershot, and the Aldershot keeper has been sent off. And he says, trust them to find some form just in time to play us, eh? Well, they did us a favour against Hartlepool, to be fair, didn't they?
Yeah, they did.
What do we expect from Solihull Moors?
A passing team, much more attractive than last season. Obviously, Tim Flowers was there last year, and both of those games, if the fans can recall them, were just god awful to watch. I mean, they were just midfield battles. As soon as Solihull Moors got it, they just lumped it upfield. Then Notts would have period of possession, but because Solihull Moors had 10 men behind the ball and had hardly moved because they just kept whacking it, it just became a very, very dull watch. But I think Jimmy Shan, he's obviously been linked with some Football League clubs since going into Solihull Moors. Good manager, good progressive young manager. 3-4-3. They've got a boy on loan there called Cameron Archer from Aston Villa. I think he'll be a real handful. Got Jamie Ward as well. I mean, you look at some of the players they've got there. Adam Rooney, you know, there was talk about him when he was at Salford being on ridiculous money. So to have him at Solihull Moors, you have to take you out of to Solihull Moors, because they must be paying out some decent dough to get those kinds of calibre of players in. So I think it'll be very, very tough. But Notts at home, good defensively. It's just, again, this issue of scoring goals. Can they be in a position where, when they create these chances, they're taking them? Because, there's been a lot of games where they've dominated possession for large spells, created chances, but haven't killed teams off.
Leigh, we're going to let you get on and get yourself sorted. Look on the bright side. Irrespective of results tomorrow, it's a heck of a shorter journey to Meadow Lane, glad to have you back, than it is to the Liberty Stadium in South Wales.
Yeah, hopefully the Notts County result is a much better than one that Forest had at the weekend. But I'm looking forward to it. It should be a good game. The pitch looks in decent nick as well, considering the weather. So
so no issues as far as we're concerned with weather. Everything's sorted at Notts.
Yeah, I think the pitch now at Notts is so good. I think the drainage, etc. Even when it's had bad weather, it still looks like a billiard surface. So, credit to the ground staff. They do a fantastic job there of keeping it in tip-top condition.
Leigh, thank you very much indeed. We look forward to